Yes, so I was sitting in meditation just this evening, just now, and kind of, finding myself quite a bit tense and about giving this talk. And then there's sort of one of the phrases from Padmasambhava's advice to the three fortunate women, which is what I'm talking about tonight. One of the lines from that came into my mind, which is, if you exercise effort without accomplishing anything thereby, know that at all times realization is your own nature, and from within act for the benefit of all beings. So yes, this is me slightly nervously giving up my talk to Padmasambhava for the benefit of all beings. Yes. So, tonight I'm going to speak about a text that some of you may be familiar with, called The Advice to the Three Fortunate Women Before Departure. And I took this text with me on solitary retreat a year ago and did what felt at the time like a deep dive into that text, though I wasn't, probably still am very much in the shallows. It's something that would take a lifetime really to explore, several lifetimes. And I want to share a bit about the text and my experience reflecting on it back then and since. So first, just a bit of context about Padmasambhava. So long ago in Tibet, there was a great teacher, and he had come from far, far away. And at the heart of his teaching was great love and peace, but he was by no means a shy and retiring character. He was equally happy in the great halls of kings and meditating in the cremation grounds, and he was something of a magician. If an adversarial demon rose up against him, it wasn't so much of a problem. He simply saw the true nature of that demon, named it, and in that way it became a servant of the Dharma, a servant of the path to awakening. So sounds like a good guy to have around, eh? Especially if you live in a world of black magicians and threatening monsters, which the mythic world of Tibet certainly was. And I say mythic because the text I'm going to talk about comes from a larger text, The Life and Liberation of Padmasambhava, which is of truly mythic proportions. It's a terma text, and these are said to have been written by fully realized Dharma practitioners and then magically concealed in like wild places like caves and mountain tops and at the bottom of lakes. And they stay there until such time as the world is ready to hear them. Then sometimes hundreds of years later, they are discovered. And this particular text is said to have been written by Yeshe Tsogyal, Padmasambhava's pupil and consort. And she's one of the three fortunate women mentioned here. So the text's origin is totally mysterious, and reading it is a bit like being in a dream. And I love that because Padmasambhava is a historic character, but very little is actually known in terms of scientific fact about his life. So to engage with Padmasambhava is to open yourself to a kind of twilight realm where you can't ever be certain that you know anything. And in fact, Padmasambhava said, let these three expressions, I do not have, I do not know, I do not understand, be repeated over and over again. So although the text I'm exploring tonight appears to be straightforward and clear advice, I think it's worth hearing with the kind of mind that is open to mythic realms. Now, as I said, Padmasambhava was a good guy to have around. He brought the Dharma, he trained practitioners, he mediated, he advised kings, he subdued the darker forces. So when he announced that he was leaving Tibet for the land of the Rakshasas, which is a kind of species of ogre, you can imagine how distressed people were. And they pleaded with him not to go, and yet go he would, but not before giving some final teachings, of which this is one. So, who are the three fortunate women? Well, there's the glorious noble queen, Queen Nang Chung, who he visits first. And then he visits two women who have gone forth. One is Yeshe Tsogyal, his pupil and consort, and the other one has the most fabulous name, Mangala, the dog keeper, the Dakini of joyousness. And if I ever become a realized Dakini, that's the sort of name that I want to have. I imagine these two sort of sleeping in caves or in cremation grounds. They're probably really grubby and with matted hair and bright eyes. So Padmasambhava has advice for a queen and advice for two wild women. He has advice for those times when we are comfortable, kings and queens of our own domain, and times when the wilderness beckons, or when we unwittingly find ourselves in the wilderness. So what I'd like to do is read the full text out to you, because if you haven't heard it before, it's an absolute treat to meet. And if you have heard it before, I don't think anyone could revisit it enough times. And I'd like to suggest that we take a moment to settle, just perhaps in meditation posture, and to allow us to travel to the mythic realm of Padmasambhava's Tibet. Then Nang Chung, the glorious noble queen, invited the Guru, that second Buddha, into the temple of turquoise dedicated to her tutelary deities. Piling up on a precious throne fine silks and tables of divination, and regaling him with many pleasing things, she greeted him respectfully and made this request. Give me a few words of great import, an effective verse which I can memorize. Though I have not renounced the world, I would like to cherish within me a doctrine which at a later time would lead me to Buddhahood. To this, the Guru replied, listen, Queen Nang Chung, to begin with, pay urgent attention to impermanence. Then strongly turn your mind towards taking refuge and direct your prayers to the lamas. These are the preliminaries without which no means exists. After that, disposing yourself physically to be calm, as in an empty house the raindrops slowly gather, relax. Do not force your mind or body. Since the tranquility of shunyata is the foundation, by forcefully turning your mind to emptiness, you chase misconceptions. In the thoughts which arise, understanding will come without doing anything. Again and yet again, work on whatever estranges you from meditation. Lay bare whatsoever arises, good and bad thoughts alike. The child who knows his way carries along on the path every harmless thing he happens upon, and nothing that harms him. During the time of insight, which is surrounded by a calm and gentle aura, openness and appearance are inseparable. The six senses come forth, though appearance and voidness are inseparable. This is the real foundation, without which no means exists. During the period of meditation, there is not anything. It is simply open. But when you waver towards appearances, delusions will arise. After careful examination, understand not to discriminate, to neither accept nor reject. As anything can happen, peace will arise from within. Even when you do not meditate, for personal growth, you need to exercise effort. If you do so without accomplishing anything thereby, Know that at all times realization is your own nature, and from within act for the benefit of beings. Unceasingly do Dharma actions. When you purify yourself of your faults, realization will come from within. Seal your virtuous action with prayers and a dedication for the purpose of all beings. Without such prayers and dedication, no means exists. Not falling into the errors of excitement or passivity, be filled with confidence. Here, in few words of great import, lie preparation, enactment, and fulfillment, the doctrine's deepest reaches of this life as of the life to come. Thus did he speak, and Queen Nang Chung was led to salvation. Then, to the crystal grotto of Yarlung, the young Himalayan woman, Mangala, the dog keeper, the Dakini of joyousness, and Yeshe Tsogyal invited the Guru and surrounded him with 100 Gana chakras. When the master has gone away to the land of the ogres, what are we to do? Thus did the Guru answer, in this way. From within, transcend the desires of body, speech, and mind. Teachers who do not gladden others and who are morose themselves, give them up. The books and letters that you do not practice, give them up. Those who compete with others and hoard possessions, give them up. Women who create disturbances and hold grudges, give them up. Hope and expectation for your own benefit, give them up. Turn away from the ranks of men and the 8 worldly concerns. Do not even own a needle or a thread. Externally, offer everything to the 3 jewels. Internally, make 100 offerings to the pure field of the Buddha. Immediately perform as many Gana chakras as you can. The ill-adapted and the incapable will reach the land of mercy. Reflect on the great dry misery of the cycle. Exhort others who have not shaken off the demon's grasp and win merit for yourselves. Though slain within the mind, desire returns from the outside. Not other than the holy Dharma is the lineage of leading others. Think of others in solitude whom no one aids. Do not be loud and boastful, rather depend on solitude. Having renounced relatives, friends, achievements, food, clothing, external, internal, and intermediate contingencies, with nothing of your own left to you, depend on only what is necessary. Like the leper, take and reflect on the humblest share. Since one cannot rely upon all the laws, in the same way as one is deceived by a faithless friend, until death comes, do without whatever is necessary. And since absolutely nothing useless will arise, the endless wandering of the mind will be conquered. Even unto poverty, misery, and death, contemplate the great perfection. Do not fail to call on me. Do not despair. So, I spent 2 weeks last August in the Vajrashīlan hut at Taraloka, a retreat centre in Scotland. And ostensibly my plan was to explore the theme of wildness in my practice and to memorize this text, a few lines every day. And unfortunately, I don't have time to go into anywhere near the whole text, and I'm not going to comment on his wonderful advice about meditation because I don't know how I would talk about it, frankly. And I think it's much better explored through practice. However, I wanted to draw out just a few points of his advice, some for the queen in all of us and some for the wild creature. So his advice for the queen, inviting the guru in. So the first day I was memorizing the text, I only learned the preamble, the bit where Nang Chung invites him in. And I think I'd probably initially thought, I'll just get this bit out of the way and then I'll get to the good stuff. But actually, as soon as I started learning the words, I totally loved them. Then Nang Chung, the glorious noble queen, invited the guru, that second Buddha, into the temple of turquoise. And I think there's something I really love about the idea of meeting Padmasambhava as a queen. Something about meeting him really, you know, sort of standing tall. And there's also something about really inviting him into the sacred space of my heart. And in fact, she really prepares the space for him, as we must do if we are to meet and take in a great teaching. If you really love someone, if you really respect them, you don't bustle about doing other things when they arrive. You make your home beautiful and you prepare yourself and you really listen. So to begin with, pay urgent attention to impermanence. Now, I almost didn't talk about this line. And I had all sorts of excuses like, oh, other people have said so much about it and it's, you know, what could I possibly add? But the fact is, it just makes me uncomfortable every time I read it. So I am going to talk about it. I can see that I don't want to pay urgent attention to impermanence. And the advice is right there up front at the beginning of the text. And it's so important, particularly for those times when I'm more queen than wild woman, because the wild woman is sort of out there on the mountaintop looking for changes in the weather. She knows about impermanence much more, and the queen not so much. In his seminar on this text, Bhante speaks quite extensively about the contrast between the West, where we're shielded from a realization of impermanence, and India, where he spent years amongst people for whom impermanence was much more visible. And he says, birth and death are going on around you all the time. You're much more aware of people coming into existence and passing out of existence. You're much more aware of the possibility of losing things. In India, if you lose your job, you can starve. Impermanence is not a philosophy or intellectual understanding. Because life is so precarious, you realize it's not much worth devoting time and energy to worldly things. It would be better if you devoted yourself to the Dharma. This is the traditional reasoning. So by contrast, Queen Nang Chung is comfortable and a bit isolated. A lot of what goes on in the world probably doesn't greatly affect her, and I think we can be a bit like that. People across the world might be at war, maybe losing their homes tonight, this very night, but I'm snug in my bed, and I think that when I wake tomorrow, everyone I know and love is going to be okay. And of course, they might not be. And I'm really struck by the fact that in the few days that I've been writing this talk, several people close to me have mentioned family or friends that are either seriously ill or have recently died. And in one case, very suddenly. It's just that it's smoothed over in our culture, so you would never know if people didn't outright tell you that they'd suffered a loss. Grief is often tucked away for a quiet moment when one is alone. We no longer wear black to signify mourning, and you wouldn't know if the person sat next to you on the train was going to a funeral. In the Dhammapada, the Buddha says, others do not realize that we are all headed for death. Those who do realize it will compose their quarrels. Once you see the precariousness of life, it can become very clear what is of real importance. So Padmasambhava says, after reflecting on impermanence, strongly turn your mind towards taking refuge, by which he means taking refuge in the three jewels, of course. But I think the term going for refuge to the three jewels, or taking refuge as it is in this text, can be a bit obscure. So I want to just unpack it a little bit. To me, it means that when the queen in me really sees that, as the Japanese teacher Kukai says, noble men and lowly alike, without exception, die away. They have died, reduced to dust and ashes. The singing halls and dancing stages have become the abodes of foxes. When she sees that, the only thing that makes sense is, for me, when the queen in me sees that, the only thing that makes sense is to open my heart to that which enables me to meet the pain of impermanence with grace and wisdom, and to devote my life to living in harmony with the way things really are. I was on a family holiday recently in Brittany, and for about a week I really lived like a queen. There were peaches and strawberry and basil sorbet and croissants and sunshine and good company. And it was quite interesting, actually. The first few days, I kind of kept a bit of a meditation practice going because, I thought it helped, positive mental states help you to be with your family. We'll see if I end up sending this talk to my family. I don't know. No, they were gorgeous. But after a few days, I kind of let it slide to reading in bed with a coffee. And by the end of this week in Brittany, I was sort of, there was a part of me that was thinking, spiritual life is actually quite hard. Life at Taraloka is quite hard. Can I not just find a rich man and marry him so that I could just spend the rest of my life eating peaches and croissants? I'm sure I could, find a way to make this situation permanent. And in a way, what brought me back to the human realm was looking at my parents. Seeing their aging and their vulnerability. And as painful as it was at times, the message was clear. Life passes. This beautiful time of peaches and croissants passes like all other moments. Like my childhood, like the days when my parents' bodies were strong and youthful. And it's not that I therefore push all the pleasant things away, but those moments when I understand how fleeting it all is. I think the true value of the three jewels, and they are called jewels because they are immeasurably valuable, becomes clear. The Buddha, the potential for awakening in all human beings, the Dharma, the teaching of the way things really are, and the Sangha, those teachers past and present, and those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas who can help us. These do not diminish. So there's so much more I wish I had time to say about his advice to Nang Chung, to the Queen, but I want to move it on to the wild women. So, advice for the wilderness from Padmasambhava. Let go what needs to be let go. The second half of his advice, I think, within our movement, seems to be a bit less popular than the first. And I imagine that this is probably because it talks about renunciation. So, what do we have to give up, according to Padmasambhava? Teachers who are morose themselves and do not gladden others, books and letters which you do not practice, that's not too bad. Hope and expectation for your own benefit. And then there's having renounced relatives, friends, achievements, food, clothing, external, internal, intermediate contingencies. So that's a lot. What is this actually getting at? I mean, is Padmasambhava really telling us to chuck it all on the fire? I don't know, but I don't think so. What I do know is that when you're stuck in a storm in the wilderness, there are things that can help you and things that can't. When I yet again got myself stuck in some pit of despair, actually, I can't phone my dad and ask him to sort it out for me. He can't kind of get me out of it. Not even my preceptor-to-be can get me out of this. She can provide love and encouragement, but she can't do the work for me. I've got to do the hard work of turning towards that demon, naming her, and holding her with love. So perhaps it isn't that I need to renounce my spiritual friends or my parents or whatever, but I do on some level need to let go of this view that they're going to save me. So there's this moment in Lord of the Rings, which I find deeply moving, when Frodo and Sam are climbing the slopes of Mount Doom. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the book, they're at the end of a very long quest and they have to throw an evil ring into a volcano. That's what's going on. And as they're climbing, they realize they won't make it to where they need to go, carrying their provisions for the way back home. So they throw away their cooking pots and their food. Now, they wouldn't have got very far in the first place without those pots, but there comes a point where they won't get any further if they keep clinging to them. And it seems like madness to let go of such security, but it's all they can do. On the other hand, we find out later in the book that there's something Sam didn't throw away, which is the elvish soil that he'd been gifted, which would make his garden at home flourish. And I think there's something really important in that. We need to let go what needs to be let go, but not our faith and not that seed of awakening. So in those moments of deep despair, I have to think, what are the cooking pots and provisions? And where is the elvish soil? But it's not to talk about Lord of the Rings, it's to talk about Padmasambhava. So on to the next bit I'd like to discuss, which is when he says, the ill-adapted and the incapable will reach the land of mercy. So I'm going to say that again. The ill-adapted and the incapable will reach the land of mercy. So how many times in my spiritual life have I just thought, I can't do this. It's too much. I can't fight spiritual battles today. I can barely tie my shoes. Or on the other hand, sometimes I've thought, oh my gosh, I've written this amazing talk and it's just going to totally lead everybody to enlightenment tonight. You know, that's also inside of me. So actually, having said it's not a talk about Lord of the Rings, I do need to go back to Lord of the Rings because I sometimes think Frodo's story is just a really powerful metaphor for being cast out into the wilderness. But anyway, one of my other favorite parts of the book is when he says, I will take the ring to Mordor, though I do not know the way. And from many perspectives, Frodo is completely ill-adapted to this task, and he's kind of incapable, but he's true of heart. And sometimes I think I need to get a tattoo that says, be like Frodo, to remind me that I do not grow towards kindness when I'm full of pride, but when I'm true of heart. When I'm softened to my own smallness. As Leonard Cohen says, every heart to love will come, but like a refugee. When we find ourselves in the wilderness, we can take heart that it is through losing the shackles of our greatness that we'll be able to go forth. Mm-hmm. And since absolutely nothing useless will arise, the endless wandering of the mind will be conquered. And in some ways, I feel this statement speaks for itself. Absolutely nothing useless will arise. Nothing. Nothing that arises is useless. Everything that happens to us is good mulch for growing our spiritual practice, whether it's pleasant or deeply painful. It doesn't mean we have to like it. But if we can see whatever arises as good mulch, we won't be wandering here and there like Megea, looking for the perfect mango grove to meditate in when the Buddha is right next to us. I also think this statement is a great source of faith. The endless wandering of the mind will be conquered. And I'm reminded of a story of someone who asked Bhante once whether he would take £1 million or enlightenment. And apparently he said he'd take the £1 million because if you just practice, enlightenment is assured. But think what we could do with the money. Yeah, there's a lot of faith in that statement, I think. So, yeah, to conclude, I want to share an experience from my solitary retreat that I think ties together a few of these points I've been speaking about tonight. So, as I said, setting out on the retreat, one of the things I wanted to explore was wildness. And I think in the beginning that meant getting in touch with the bit of me that loves running through the forest and skinny dipping in ice-cold waterfalls. One night, though, I had a very strong experience of fear. Not just fear, actually, terror. I'd climbed a mountain in the evening with the intention of spending the night near the summit. It was a bit wet and windy, and I was incredibly sweaty from carrying my pack and my tent and my gear and my food for 2 days. I hadn't been climbing for 2 days. Up several hundred meters. And this was after a day of intensive meditation in which Padmasambhava had turned up unexpectedly and said, "Do it tonight. Tonight's the night for camping." So I wasn't going to argue with him. Although I've been known to, it doesn't usually go well. Now, I don't have a rational explanation for why this happened, except that I'd been meditating intensively for about a week and invoking Padmasambhava, probably more than I'd realized. And I was tired from the climb. But the moment I got my tent up, terror struck. And I felt totally alone, tiny and vulnerable. And intellectually, I knew that the wind wasn't so bad and that my tent was well pitched, but the screaming terror wouldn't let up. Even heating up a tin of beans didn't help, which I totally thought it would. Not going for refuge to beans. Anyway, that wasn't written down. Anyway. The only thing that did help in that situation was chanting to Avalokiteshvara, strongly turning my mind towards taking refuge. I lay in my sleeping bag that night, alternately chanting and doing the Metabhavana, which was traditionally taught as an antidote to fear. And somehow or other sort of made it through the night. And from that point on, wildness didn't mean jumping in lakes or sleeping on mountaintops. It meant knowing my own vulnerability, my own impermanence, and seeing the fragility of life all around me. Suddenly, wildness was a tenderness and intimacy that arose from an intense identification with life around me, because we're all subject to impermanence. It was about walking with care over the mossy ground and sharing in the exhilaration of a red kite's soaring flight. And it was not just finding myself to be wild, but also human, that I have a human heart which can love and transform and turn towards the incredible beauty of the three jewels. And Padmasambhava says, even unto poverty, misery, and death, reflect on the great perfection. I don't have a lot of experience of any of these, really, but I am deeply moved by stories of people in the most dire of situations, political prisoners and refugees, who, when everything else falls away, are still able to act with kindness, with faith, and with a sense of identification with the fragility of life. So the Queen must reflect on impermanence, on the impermanence of everything she takes for granted, to understand that she will one day be cast into the wilderness of old age, sickness, and death. The women who have gone forth must let go of every false refuge until all that remains is Padmasambhava's final exhortation. Do not fail to call on me. Do not despair.